Okay, Fáilte Rómh Arás don Durney. Right, we're into the second half of the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the Ebro and the retreats in honour of the International Brigaders from Ireland. The format of the second half will be, we're going to have a talk from James Durney initially, and that will be followed by music from Sive, who you very briefly met earlier. I'll give her proper introduction now after the talk, and we'll be finishing with a very special guest. Okay? Now, James Durney is an author, a historian, and a historical consultant. He hails from Naas in County Kildare. I'm starting to sense something of a Kildare theme this evening. And is an award-winning author, a local and military historian, and he's a prolific writer with a large number of published works under his belt. James has worked with the Irish language national broadcaster, Co.Kildare, on the development of their documentary series Mobs Mheiriceá, a fantastic series. If anyone has missed it, you'll still get some of them, as far as I know, on the Co.Kildare player. He was also a consultant and a chief researcher on RTA's war stories. James graduated from the National University of Ireland, Maynooth, with a first-class honours in local history. He was the 2011 winner of the Lord Walter Fitzgerald Prize for Original Research, and he serves as the secretary of the Kildare Federation of History Groups, as well as being the chairperson of the Naas Local History Group. His published works include The Mob, The History of Irish Gangsters in America, Far from the Short Grass, On the One Road, The Volunteer, The Far Side of the World, In the Shadow of Kings, Vietnam, The Irish Experience, A Bridge, A Town, A People, Hearth and Home, The Civil War in Kildare in 2012, The War of Independence in Kildare in 2013, and Irish Casualties in the Korean War in 2014. That's a book a year. He's a busy man. This evening he will be speaking about the legend from Kildare that is the International Brigadier Frank Conroy. James is also currently working on a book it'll not surprise you to know. This one is about the Curragh internment camps during the War of Independence. It will shortly be published by Mercier Press. Should be out next year. Watch this space. Put your hands together, please, for James Durney.
Actually, I'm working on two books, but I didn't name it, the other one. This story is really about Frank Conroy and the Spanish Civil War. And I became interested in Frank Conroy around 2000 when I'd read that this one sole representative from County Kildare had fought on the Republican side. We had a good few on the other side, but I wasn't really too interested in them. Really, Frank was someone I was really interested in. I wanted to find out more about him. But it took me a long time to find out that he was actually born in Kildare. There was rumours that he was born in Kildare town, and then I discovered that he was actually born in Kilcullen. And back in 2000 I was writing a book called On the One Road, and it was political unrest in Kildare from 1913 to 1997. And I approached an uncle of mine, Timmy Durney, a well-known man in Moorfield circles and Newbridge circles, and asked him, would he do a favour for me? Would he speak to a friend of his, Christy Moore, a fellow Newbridge man, and asked him would he contact Mick O'Riordan, who was alive at the time. Mick was being a survivor of the Irish Brigade, or the International Brigades, and Christy knew him, and I asked Timmy would he approach Christy and ask him did he know Frank Conroy when he was in Spain. So I got a little slip of paper, it was probably about half an A4 size, brown paper, with a scrawl on it from Mick Reardon, and at this stage he would have been in his 80s, and he said, no, I didn't know Frank Conroy in Spain, he was dead again I got there. So Frank Conroy had arrived in Spain quite quickly, and he had died quite quickly. He had reached the front and within 6 days of arriving in Spain, he was dead. So there was nobody that really knew anything about him, and I searched and searched for years, and I couldn't find anything. And then, of recent, I went up to the Genealogy Centre in Dublin and found all the details of Frank Conroy's birth in Kilcullen, County Kildare, and that he had later moved back to Dublin, where his father had been from. So the story really is of Frank Conroy and the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War was one of the most controversial conflicts of the last century and also one of the bloodiest. When the war broke out in July 1936, the Times judged it an anachronistic struggle irrelevant to modern Europe. Spain was seen as a fading power, stifled by a regressive society and subject to the sort of social and political extremism which modern Europe had outgrown. However, far from being irrelevant to Europe, the devastation of Spain by the forces of fascism, communism and nationalism foreshadowed the Second World War. It has even been argued that Spain marked the beginning of the war against fascism, an interpretation implicitly critical of the democratic states for standing aside while a fascist rebellion overthrew a legally elected government. Why were the Irish so interested in the war? Essentially because Spain was seen as a religious rather than a political conflict. Most people knew little about Spain or its complicated politics when Franco's rebellion broke out, but Spain was regarded, like Ireland, as a historically Catholic nation. For a number of years, the Irish bishops and the Catholic press have portrayed Spain as a Catholic state besieged by communism and atheism. When the Civil War began, the complexities of the conflict were largely ignored. That the Republic comprised not just communists, but socialists, liberals, middle-class progressives, landless labourers, workers, Catalonians and Catholic Basques was little reported. Similarly, that Franco's nationalists comprised not just much of the clergy, but a reactionary coalition of fascists, army officers, landowners and industrialists was not much remarked on either. Instead, public debate was dominated by the anti-clerical violence that swept Republican Spain after Franco's rebellion. The sensational press reported of these atrocities, often embellished in highly emotive accounts, had an enormous impact on Catholic Ireland. Within weeks, the Irish hierarchy was calling for Franco's victory. In the face of this strong pro-Franco consensus, a tiny campaign of support for the Spanish Republic, organised by a small number of left-wing Republicans and Communists, struggled to be heard. Following the formation of Eoin O'Duffy's Irish Brigade, and partly in response, a smaller contingent of men left Ireland to fight for the Spanish Republic. Around 200 Irishmen fought with the 15th International Brigade, a predominantly English-speaking brigade which included a British battalion and an American battalion. The Irish group were led by Frank Ryan, an IRA veteran and editor of Unfublocked. They arrived in Spain mostly in groups crossing the border with France. Frank Ryan left Ireland from Dunleary on the 11th of November with a group of Republicans. The Irish left's contribution was made up of veterans of the IRA, the Irish Citizen Army, Irish Republican Congress and the Six County Socialist Party. Many of them, but not all, were communists. The majority were urban working class men, veterans of the street struggles between the left and the blue shirts. Over a quarter hailed from Dublin, while the other cities of Ireland had a big representation. The men of the Connolly column, as they became known, fought for a variety of motives: anti-fascism, the defence of Spanish democracy, revolutionary idealism, loyalty to the Communist Party and adventure. Frank Conroy, I discovered, was born on the 25th of February 1914 in Kilcullen, County Kildare, and baptised on the 1st of March 1914. His parents were Michael Conroy, born in County Laois, and Catherine Farrell, born in County Dublin. They married in Dublin South in 1908. Michael Conroy was a baker by trade, and in the 1911 census he was living with his wife and two children, John aged 2 and Mary an infant, in the Guinness Trust buildings in Patrick Street, Dublin. Michael Conroy moved his family to County Kildare shortly after, probably for employment reasons, as there was a large bakery, O'Connell's, operating in Kilcullen. Frank Conroy received his confirmation in Sandymount, Dublin, on the 15th of March 1928, which indicates that the family had at some stage moved back to Dublin. Frank Conroy left for Spain on the Dunleary-Holyhead ferry on the 13th of December 1936 with about 25 other Irish volunteers, including Frank Ryan and Frank Edwards, whose removal from his position as a national teacher in Waterford caused a controversy 2 years previous. Frank Conroy was a former IRA volunteer and a member of the Communist Party of Ireland. He gave no next of kin. The Republican contingent, Frank Ryan told an Irish Press reporter at the quayside, besides being a very efficient fighting force, every member of it having been in action, is also a demonstration. It is a demonstration of the sympathy of revolutionary Ireland with the Spanish people in their fight against international fascism. It is also a reply to the intervention of Irish fascism in the war against the Spanish Republic, which, if unchallenged, would remain a disgrace on our own people. More Irish volunteers joined Ryan's group in London. Walter Greenhaw from Manchester met Ryan's party on the ferry from Britain to France. And I know you'll be surprised by this, and said that the Irishmen were in high spirits, singing rebel songs in the bar. 13 men, including Frank Conroy, crossed the border into Spain under the guidance of Frank Ryan, and within days, 6 of them would be dead. They crossed legally on buses during the night of 14th of December at the assembly point of the Internationals, the fortress of Figueres. After stopovers in Barcelona and Valencia, the group arrived in Albacete, the main base of the Internationals, in the early morning of the 17th of December. Frank Ryan organised 43 of the Irish volunteers for service in the Mercier battalion of the 14th Franco-Belge Brigade, and they left for the Cordoba front on Christmas Eve. The Irishmen, mostly Dubliners, were posted to the battalion's number 1 company of 145 English speakers. Ryan did not accompany them. He was not given a field commission, probably because he was not a communist, and also because he had a hearing impediment. The task of number 1 company was to capture the town of Lopera. The company's first section comprised mainly Irish volunteers, commanded by Kit Conway, an experienced IRA activist. They were machine gunned from the air on Christmas Day and had to withdraw from the positions outside Lopera. Another attempt was made to encircle the town on the 28th of December. However, the reinforced and well-fortified enemy forces again resisted strongly. As the badly equipped men of the International Battalion tried to cross the ridges in front of the town, they were subjected to machine gun fire and artillery bombardments and had to retreat. They did not have magazine clips for their antiquated Austrian Steyr rifles and were supposed to depend on the French Shawkat light machine guns, which were notorious for jamming. 5 Dublin men, James Foley, Anthony Fox, Michael May, Michael Nolan and Thomas Wood, John Meehan from Galway and Frank Conroy from Kildare were killed. Almost all the other Irish volunteers in the unit were wounded. Frank Conroy died from gunshot wounds and shrapnel wounds to the head. In total, 300 volunteers from 19 nations were killed and another 600 were wounded in the disastrous attack. Efforts were made to discover why the battalion had been so disorganised and ineffective. The French commander of the Marseillais battalion, Lieutenant Colonel de la Salle, was accused of cowardice, treason and even of spying for the enemy. De la Salle was quickly tried and executed. Few mourned his loss, but many volunteers who fought with number 1 company at Lopera believed that De La Salle was made a scapegoat. The English-speaking company was transferred back to Madrid on the 11th of January 1937 to contain another enemy offensive. On Christmas Eve, the company had been 145 strong. When they returned to Albacete the following month, only 67 men remained. In total, 59 Irishmen died in Spain fighting with international brigades. Another 114 were wounded, while 12 were captured, including Frank Ryan, who was captured at the Battle of Aragon and died in captivity in Dresden, Germany in 1944. Christy Moore paid tribute to the Irish volunteers with his poignant song, Viva la Quinta Brigada, and in the final verse he names Frank Conroy, his fellow countyman, who fought and died in Spain. So why did these Irish Republicans and leftists such as Frank Conroy go to fight in Spain? Frank Ryan was asked by the notorious Gestapo, and he replied, because it's the same fight in both places. From the time I learned of Frank Conroy's connection to County Kildare nearly 20 years ago, his birthplace was in dispute, and so it took several years of research before I identified the full facts about his birth in Kilcullen about 3 years ago. Since then, Frank Conroy has been commemorated annually in his native county by the Frank Conroy Commemoration Committee, while Newbridge man Paul McCormack has written a song, A Young Man Named Frank Conroy. Mick Healy has been in contact with the niece of Frank's from New York, and so in conclusion it has been confirmed that Frank Conroy's body and those of his dead comrades lie somewhere in the hills around Lough today. In the not too distant future it is hoped that we may get to visit the burial place of these brave young Irishmen. And I will end with some lines from Paul's song. In a lonely grave across the sea, Frank Conroy sleeps there peacefully, for he died for true democracy, a young man named Frank Conroy. Thank you.